I'm the Moonlit Page Turner. Grab your treat, grab your tea. Let's talk books. For this month's reads, we are traveling to Belgium. Belgium gained their independence in 1830 when they broke away from the Netherlands, and it's situated right above France. So there are three official languages in Belgium. You have French, which is to the south, makes sense because it's by the French border. You have Flemish or Dutch in the north, hence the Netherlands, and you have German in the east. And Belgium is known primarily worldwide for their foods, their chocolates. They had some political influence as well. They colonized Congo, which will become important when we talk about 1010 by Herge, which is one of our reads. And then the Flemish aspect and the language aspect will become important when we talk about our second read, which is War and Turpentine, and that is by Stefan Hertmans. And that book technically is historical fiction, although Stefan takes the journals of his grandfather and writes about his grandfather's life. He does take some liberties with it, and so that's why it's technically considered historical fiction. But that is about his grandfather, and in particular, his grandfather's time during World War I. Before we get into this month's reads, let's get into this month's treat. Now, there was a lot of options that I had from Belgium. My family history is from Belgium, so I've had a lot of the food from there. They are known mostly for their sweeter treats because you have Belgian chocolates, we have Belgian waffles, and we have French fries. Yes, pommes frites do come from Belgium. So I wanted to try something that I had not tried before, and I found a recipe for Mastel, and that comes from the city of Ghent, which is a Flemish-speaking city in Belgium. And it is a sweeter bread. It has cinnamon in it. You can eat it with butter. I chose to put cream cheese on mine, and it's known specifically because it has this little dent on here. It has an egg wash on it too, and it's light and fluffy. It kind of reminds me a little bit more of like a cinnamon pretzel than a cinnamon bagel. But I like it. It's really good. All right, the first book that I'm going to talk about is the 1010 books, and this is by Herge. So Herge, his full name is Georges Prosper Remy, and he took the G and the R from his initials and he flips them. So we get RG, which in French is Herge, hence the name. And this is the first volume. It has 1010 in America, 1010 the Cigars of the Pharaoh, and 1010 and the Blue Lotus. Herge and 1010 have a controversial history. The first set of comics was 1010 and the Congo, and that first came out in 1929, and it was actually written as propaganda for colonialization of Congo. What happened in the Congo with Belgium, horrific. I do not excuse bad behavior no matter what century you are born in, but one of the things that I want to talk about when it comes to Hergé is the fact that he does grow as a person. And by the time we get to the Blue Lotus, he does talk about racism very freely. So the first two on here, these are not the first 10 comics, although it's volume 1. So you had 1010 in the Congo and 1010 in the Soviet Union. Those really aren't produced anymore for reasons. 1010 in America deals with Al Capone. 1010 is a boy journalist who comes and gets into a whole bunch of troubles, and he has a dog named Snowy. He is constantly kidnapped and chased and shot at, and he is doing adventurous things for a young boy who is unchaperoned. 1010 in America, you can definitely tell that Hergé's influences were from cinematic cowboys and Indians movies. The depictions of the Native Americans as well as the Mexican Americans, not great. In the Cigars of the Pharaohs, this came out in a series of comics from 1932 to 1934. We do see Thompson and Thompson, which are the blubbering police officers that will constantly arrest 1010 throughout the series as well as let him go. The depictions of the Africans, not great. The Blue Lotus is where we start to see a change from Hergé and 1010. Hergé had a friend who was Chinese, and through his friendship with this Chinese man, a light bulb came on for Hergé, and he started to change not only as a person, but as a writer, and so he spoke more about racism within the comics. Again, the Blue Lotus, during wartime with World War II, depictions of the Japanese, not great. So it does take him quite a while to grow into this later man that he does become, speaking out against racism, although it's perpetuated through some of his work, and that work will now live throughout eternity. I do have to say they are a little bit more violent than what we're used to for some of the comics for kids. That is a warning. If you are interested in the 1010 comics, I would suggest reading the later editions. I do, though, give Herge some credit for growing as a person and using that growth within within his writing, and having his character speak out against things that he was guilty of in the past. So, um, I would not fully recommend reading this set of comics, but definitely the later ones are a lot better in their depictions. And I mean, the artwork's fun. He goes on a lot of like interesting adventures. But I would say maybe skip volume 1 and go to volume 2. The second book that I chose was War and Turpentine, and this is by Stefan Hertmans. I originally picked this book up because as I was reading about it, it was talking about a first person's depiction of World War One, and you read a lot about World War II, but not as much as about World War One. Then when I started to do more research on this book, and I was really confused about why it's classified as historical fiction and not as a biography. As you read through the book, you do get like conversations within the chapters. So Stefan does take some liberties with some of the things that happens, but he does have collections of his grandfather's notebooks, and that's what he's using as his main source besides conversations with his grandfather. Stefan is himself a character within the story. He will go to some of the places that his grandfather went to. There's also pictures in the book. They're printed like randomly throughout. So you have some pictures, and then in the back you'll have like pictures of his grandfather and his grandmother. And then there's also pictures of paintings. The reason why it's called War and Turpentine, it's told in 3 parts. So you have his grandfather's name is Urbain Martien, and you have his life before the war, his life during the war, and then his life after the war. And Urbain is, he's a man of many talents, but one of those talents is drawing. And he gets that talent from his father, who was an artist. And his father dies when Urbain is in his early teenage years. And his father was an artist. He would draw like he'd paint frescoes in churches. And he ended up getting sick at one of his jobs. And then I think he died of like pneumonia. The first part of the book was really hard for me to like comprehend what was happening, because he talks a lot in imagery, and he talks a lot in certain paintings and the way that paintings make you feel. Then he also talks about what a horrific childhood this man has. Y'all be some kind of crazy growing up in the early 1900s. I'm sure life like this still exists as well, but he writes about growing up. He had a friend that worked at a slaughterhouse, and that was a really gross chapter. He works for a little bit time at a place where they like break down metals, and someone falls in, and that was horrific. So he has a traumatic childhood, and then he goes into World War One. In World War One, he is an officer because he had military training, which is like an academy after his father died and his mother remarried. So he is kind of in charge of his own unit, but Urbain speaks Flemish and not French, and so he is discriminated against quite a lot by the French officers who are above him, because they tend to be from richer areas, have higher education. And so if you know anything about military anywhere, typically the people that are higher up are the ones that come from wealthier backgrounds and higher education. So his unit gets volunteered a lot. And some of it is him just being like, no one else is volunteering. Fine, we'll do it. Urbain also gets shot like 3 times. And so he has to like be taken out, and then he recovers, and then he goes right back in. So the depictions of World War I, if you are someone who is into military history and into the history of war, I would say the middle chapter parts that are about World War I, fantastic. that part was really interesting to me. Then we get life after World War One, and this is where he decides to settle down. He meets a girl that he wants to marry, and then she gets sick and she dies. And so her name was Maria Emilia. And so he marries her sister. And her sister name is Gabrielle. And they get married and they have one child. And their relationship was interesting because I don't think Gabrielle was really that interested in Urbain. And it really sounds like Urbain was not that interested in Gabrielle. So as a study of a person of the time period, you get to see his whole life. You get to see it from the point of view of his grandson, who is learning about his grandfather as he's reading these notebooks that are left behind. And then you get a little bit of Belgian history. If you are someone who is into art, you may also like this book as well, because he does talk about a lot of famous paintings and what those paintings meant to his grandfather and his great grandfather. So that part, I am not super into art like that. So I found that to be a little boring personally. It's beautifully written, but I just didn't care about it. So in the whole, I did like this book. I thought the middle part was the best part. The beginning and the end kind of dragged for me, but I'm really glad I read it. Hey, thanks for stopping by. Next month, we are traveling to Belize. If you are interested in what we are reading next, please visit us on Instagram and Goodreads. See you then.